I work with many students who've gone off obviously and done, degrees and qualifications and all sorts, and then they're not able to get into the industry, and the path that they've carved out for themselves in their mind doesn't match the reality of what the situation is, and that's really hard for people to accept. And so they grieve for a circumstance which no longer is, and they grieve for a life that they thought they were going to live. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges within young people at the moment.
Welcome back to the Believe in Yourself podcast. Today we have an incredible individual who is a specialist in the field of mental health and trauma. He works across education, mental health and sport in various different roles. Please welcome to the Believe in Yourself podcast, Mike Armiger.
Hi Luke, hi everyone, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you keeping?
I'm good. It's we've had some nice weather recently, haven't we, in this strange and weird period. It's even been sunny in Wales from what I hear.
It does, and it's usually whenever we're locked in, it appears to be the weather has played its part. But it's always nice to look out and see sunny blue skies than the usual rain that we often see here in Wales. Exactly.
I mean, I've had to venture over the bridge now and live just outside Bristol, and I've had reports that the temperature is significantly increased from just about freezing in Wales. Is that right?
Definitely. So you've got your shorts on now then, rather than your hoodies.
Yeah, underneath the blazer I'm wearing, and I am in shorts. You're absolutely right.
Perfect. So I think a great place to start, before we actually find out about the amazing work that you do and how you first got involved with it, I'd love to find out more about Mike as a young person and where you very first started with this journey.
I'm not sure if I should disclose what I was like entirely as a young person, Luke, because I was a bit of an asbo, if I'll be honest, in my teenage years. But no, my upbringing was slightly different. My parents, I grew up in Abergavenny and various different areas around Monmouthshire, and I was very lucky, really. I had a very nice upbringing. But my parents fostered from a young age, so my upbringing was somewhat, although comfortable, and I was certainly very privileged as opposed to a lot of people. I understood that I saw the world in a slightly different way, really. Because of the amount of children that we had come through the house that had experienced lots of different elements of real poverty and abuse and lots of different things. So I guess really as a young person I felt a little bit distant, if I'm being honest, from lots of friends. I mean, I had plenty of friends, I had plenty of people coming in and out of my life, but I never really got that they understood what the world was like, really, which you shouldn't do as a young person, should you? You shouldn't really know all the harsh realities of the world, but I was acutely aware of them at quite a young age. My mother worked for Women's Aid, so obviously that compounded all of those things that I just mentioned. My dad was an outdoor education teacher, so that was a big relief for me sort of growing up, because there were a lot of times I spent climbing and canoeing and goodness knows what else, and he used to encourage us to go caving as well, which I hated. So we'd often be found in the middle of Clydach Gorge or something, going in the middle of a cave. So yeah, I played a lot of rugby. Rugby was a massive passion of mine, and also lacrosse for a while as well. And loved that because it was very aggressive and violent. You could bash people with a stick and trip people up. Loved that. So yeah, it was. School wasn't. I was good at school. I was one of those kind of people that if I put the effort in, I actually could pull really good grades out the bag. And my teachers, it used to drive my teachers insane that I wouldn't do anything all year, and somehow I'd end up coming out with a B or something. But I struggled in school in my teenage years quite a lot, not because of anything in particular, but just I increasingly found it difficult to sort of have this idea of the way that the world works inflicted on me, and be told that, algebra was the most important thing in the world, when the night before I'd been up till 3 o'clock in the morning because one of the kids was, in a really significant element of distress. So the disconnect, I think, filtered into education, which is surprising, really, now that I work there.
So you talk a little bit about kind of your experiences and how you maybe saw the world a little bit differently as a young age. How did that help you growing up? Because you was able to look out for things, or you was able to see things as you grew older, or did that kind of hinder maybe it's a bit more of a disadvantage?
It's a very good question. You're very good at this, Luke. The main thing I found is that it helped me in the longer term. So I think my best education, no qualification that I've ever got, has taught me as much as my upbringing, and as much as fostering and living with those young people day in, day out has. And so in the long term, it's been massively beneficial, and something that has taught me a huge amount of skills. And I owe a lot to those children, really, in terms of where I am now. At the time, I think because I was launched so quickly into adulthood, and not through any fault of my parents or any other people, but because of the circumstances that we were presented with, I found that I just wanted to get there as quick as possible, really. So I didn't really have the time to, I didn't put the time aside to explore all of those different things. I went out and I had fun and I did stupid things, of course, but certainly, from the age of sort of 16 upwards, those are the times I actually sort of knuckled down a little bit and just tried to get to 18 as quickly as I could. And it's strange, really, because I think actually, if you don't go to university, or if you start a year later, you go travelling and do lots of different things, it's amazing how quickly all the footing that you were, that you thought was so sure, your community, your friends, all of those different things, it means how quickly sometimes those things can sort of disappear, and your footing becomes very uneven very quickly. And so trying to find a place in the world, I think, can be a very difficult thing for people, which is why I see a lot of young people now trying to find that place, sometimes in all the wrong areas, bless them. And I understand how quickly people can get there, really. It's not as difficult as people make out. It can happen very quickly for anybody, any place, anywhere.
And that's definitely something that I see in my work. A lot of teachers who I work with, they're telling me, this young person they're disengaged, they don't want to work, they're not motivated, and overall they're a bad student. However, when I kind of then allow the time to build a relationship and learn about that student, you then find out about, they suddenly have it's a much bigger picture that sometimes the teachers don't see, because they don't feel comfortable in telling them, that teacher, what actually is going on maybe back home. So I think what young people are getting very good at the minute is masking how they're really feeling. And I feel a lot of young people are saying that, yeah, I'm fine, or I just hate school, when the fact is they don't hate school. I was working with one young person in a school in West Wales before, and they were telling me that this student hates school, doesn't want to be here. And I said, okay, amazing. Let me find out why he hates school. And when I got to have that conversation with him, it wasn't that he hated school. School was the only place that he had was warm and safe. It's just he didn't like behaving in school, and he felt as if that was the only place then where he could have social contact with other people, and that's when he became angry. So it was just a way of diverting his attention and energy into something that was positive. And, we only have those experiences when we get to take the time out and to listen. But I'm sure there are many teachers out there who would be able to really relate to your story in regards to that. They can see young people who think that they're not a great student, but the fact is they have a bigger picture affecting them at home, or they have other influences that may be hindering their performance inside of education. So what would your advice be to if a teacher was to be listening that can relate to your story? What would you say to them?
I spend a lot of time in the training room with teachers and sort of in education as a whole, and especially in really specialist provisions where, the children have really experienced such complex situations that have had such a profound and challenging impact on them. And I think the one thing I come back to quite commonly, there's lots of complex things that play out. It's so difficult to be stood in front of that many young people with all different backgrounds, environments, influences, goodness knows what else. And sometimes it's really hard as an educator that when you do really reach out, between those hours of, 8:30 and 3:30 or whatever the hours are, to then know sometimes that work is going to be undone when that young person goes into a toxic home environment, for example. So it's hard sometimes, in terms of mindset, and it doesn't mean you stop trying, but it's definitely, you sometimes feel like you're up against it. But the one thing that I keep coming back to is that I think young people really do latch on to sincerity, and that when you ask somebody something, I found over the years that I've been very fortunate to reconnect with students and pupils afterwards. And I think as well, I do a bit of work in university settings as well. It's a bit of a different relationship, but it's still fundamentally the same, that they're just older teenagers. That actually what they really need is the time, the space, and all of those things. Now, the school system doesn't always allow us the ability to be able to do that. And I used to be really strong in saying to my leadership team and everything else, look, the thing that we really need at the start of the term, some time to get to know them, and some time to be able to invest in those relationships and all of those things. But everything you're juggling can sometimes make it hard. But I think the sincerity of you actually going out of your way, or you actually asking people, even if you get no response, even if it's not the response you want, I think if you're sincere, even if you don't necessarily get through to that person at that moment, at that time, it might not be now, it might be later. And I know for sure that there were young people, teachers that I had in my school. I was horrendous for some of them. There is absolutely no doubt that I absolutely deserve to spend the majority of my time sat outside the head's office. But the ones that I really latched onto were the ones that were sincere. They didn't necessarily cut me a massive amount of slack. They didn't let me run riot by any means at all. In fact, the majority of them weren't like that whatsoever. But I really got when they asked me if I was okay, that they actually meant it. And they weren't there on a crusade to try and rescue me or anything. They just genuinely, that's just who they were. And who they were in the classroom was who they were outside of school. I always talk about my history teacher. I mean, I had so many amazing teachers, but my history teacher was just phenomenal. And she used to hide me in a room sometimes when I was in trouble, and goodness knows what else. I mean, she was incredible. But she tragically died a couple of years ago, and she was such an inspiration to so many people. But when I went to her funeral, what I was amazed at was how the way that her family, her friends, and everybody was describing her was exactly the same person that she was in the classroom. There was no disconnect. And I think sometimes it can be very vulnerable for professionals to be authentic and be sincere. And I get that. I do understand. But I think actually the benefits sometimes far outweigh the negatives, and that that's sometimes the stuff that children latch onto. They might not be able to latch on to some of the work, some of the lessons and the difficulty in the curriculum, but actually they can latch onto the relationship. So that's kind of where I start with people.
And coming back then to, you talk about the impact that your teachers had and the importance of being sincere with people and others. How do you feel that has maybe shaped the way you are now as an educator?
It is. I find it hard not to get emotional when I talk about them, because they just literally shielded me from everything. I mean, from exclusion, from goodness knows what else. And I am fundamentally who they were in the classroom. There's, I know the importance of being funny. Well, not that I am very funny. I mean, my humour's terrible. But I know the importance of trying to lighten the mood, should we say, because of my history teacher, and why it's important to engage, and why it's important to be able to take a bit of a light-hearted approach. I mean, I remember one time, it was the best thing. When you're a kid and a teacher says something funny, it's like the best thing in the world, isn't it? And I remember she was handing out essays. And it was the only essay I'd ever do in history. I wouldn't do any of the others. And she sort of handed mine back, and she's like, Mike Armiger, this was A star, this was a novel, you should be writing publications, and you should be doing this and everything. So I was like, oh yeah, loving this. My best mate sat next to me, and she literally slammed the paper down, and she was like, Lewis, you should be writing bedtime stories, because this sent me to sleep. And I was just like, that for me was just the best thing that, I remembered about her. I learned how to be, kind, but also firm from my music teacher. She's still, I still speak to her now, and she's literally still on my case now all these years later. I mean, she rings me up and she's like, I just seen what you wrote. That's outrageous. What are you doing? She's just straight to the point. But I know that if I was in real trouble, she'd probably be the first person I'd ring to bail me out. They've shaped who I am. But also what's been quite a relief to me is seeing some people years later. I'm learning German at the moment, and it's not going very well, but I'm trying. And I sort of put a message out the other day on social media, sort of saying, I'd really like to, maybe have a conversation with somebody who's starting learning German as well. My old French teacher messaged me, and she was like, yeah, I'll absolutely do that. And I thought, I was a nightmare. In probably some of the lessons, I can't recall all of them, and I'm terrified about what she's going to say when I speak to her next week. But she was like, no, I'd absolutely love to. It'd be lovely. And I just thought that, that ability to forgive and to forget and to see somebody beyond what they remember, I think is a real quality, because really who we are at 14 is who we are at, 30, 21, whatever. So I think that ability to see beyond the person that we've got in front of us in that classroom is a real skill.
I fully relate to that. For me, it was that I only had a handful of teachers who really believed in me, who was there for me, and I could count on. And the rest of them just thought I was a pupil like yourself, who was just, no, he's just another pupil who doesn't care about his education. When I did. It was just that I had a different way of showing it. And it was only in some lessons where I could physically and practically apply myself to was lessons that I used to excel, because when I used to sit down in an English lesson, I used to be the teacher's worst nightmare, because I was sat there writing, but I was thinking about all the things and the thoughts of mental health problems that I had going through my head. However, you put me in a DT classroom or a PE lesson, and I'd thrive because I practically was able to apply myself to something that took my mind off the outside world. And it was like, I completely agree with the aspect that it was the teacher's ability to see past my doubts, to see past the problems I walked in for the door in, and they just saw me as a young person who isn't in a great place, but they saw me more importantly as someone who they could have a small influence of. And it's those teachers who you'll always remember.
Oh, absolutely. And I see in mental health services all the time, when people are in vast amounts of distress and goodness as well else, and are in real desperate states. Sometimes, cracking a joke, or saying something sarcastic or something. I mean, I'm not certainly advocating that, we find it hilariously funny that people are in distress. But, I remember an occasion where somebody was in such a huge amount of stress, they threw a chair towards me. And I said, well, that was a bit dramatic, wasn't it? And, and they thought it was hysterical. And again, we know with the research and all those different things, that when people have intense thought cycles and are in vast amounts and, immersed in states of distress, that actually is something often quite random, whether it be humour, or whether it be a stranger, asking them something, or, a phrased question that actually pulls people out of it. So, the research backs up all of that anecdotal experience, isn't it?
Completely. And I think it's brilliant how we can now have research to back that up, where previously, perhaps you shouldn't say that, let's be serious. Well, no, hang on a minute. There's always a place to have a smile on someone's face, whether that's through a light-hearted joke or a simple comment. And I think that can really help people. But what I'd like to come back to now is, we've talked about yourself as a young person and some of your experiences as an educator, but I'm conscious that I haven't actually asked you yet of how you made that transition from being a young person into the role that you are in now.
Well, it was kind of weird, because I don't really feel like my path was purposely carved out in that way. I feel that I spent a little bit of time dilly-dallying around what I really wanted to do. I mean, I moved quite high up quite quickly, I'm not going to lie. And the reason that I moved high up quite quickly was because I had the experience of living in that type of home with those children. But also similarly, sport was a massive part of my life. So I started off with coaching, really. And again, moved up quite high quite quickly in that. So that was my angle to then go into education. And working, I worked in primary and secondary for a while. But then really specialised in specialist education, where a lot of pupil referral units and special ed was really where I ended up, because I remember my first couple of days in leadership, which is, again, cast upon me. It was not necessarily something I'd really thought about. And that transition into the workplace just seemed like a natural step for me to take, because I was surrounded by the children that I'd always been surrounded by. So it just felt like they weren't in my home necessarily all the time. They were now just where I worked, and it wasn't just 3 or 4 of them. It was a whole school of them. And I think that the transition was much easier for me. But I meet people all the time who find that they often end up grieving for circumstances which they thought were going to pan out in the way that they were. So I work with many students who've gone off, obviously, and done degrees and qualifications and all sorts. And then they're not able to get into the industry, and the path that they've carved out for themselves in their mind doesn't match the reality of what the situation is, and that's really hard for people to accept. And so they grieve for a circumstance which no longer is, and they grieve for a life that they thought they were going to live. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges within young people at the moment, and certainly generations coming through now, is that the jobs that perhaps they thought existed, the path that they thought was there, is not there. And actually what we need now more than ever is young people that are able to diversify with a huge skill set and apply that in different areas. Because I certainly was not somebody who wants to spend the rest of my life in a classroom. I certainly was not somebody who wants to spend the rest of my life just in education, although I absolutely love it. I was very thirsty to find more out about the world. And so I was very lucky that I had the flexibility in which to do that, whether it was a day a week at the sports council or whether it was a day a week in, mental health services or working with an educational psychology, all those different things. I could go and do that because I had the flexibility. But I don't think we allow people to be flexible enough, really. I don't think that, it's no longer going to be a world where people are going to be in a career possibly for the rest of their life. I mean, my parents were. And their parents before them were in one job. Their pensions were amazing as a result because they stayed in one job all of their life. But that's not realistic anymore. Work is very diverse and our world looks very different. So I think the very best thing that we could do was allow people to build a skill set which speaks to their values, who you are in education. A teacher, I find, gets boxed in very quickly. Although it's a massive skill set and there are huge amounts of stuff that are in there. I mean, you know how to make sure you keep kids alive when you take them on a school trip. You know how to, clean up a load of sick on the bus. You know how to do all of these different things. But because you're a teacher, your skill set is apparently quite narrow. But yeah, I know huge amounts of teachers, and educators like myself who have gone into health and have done absolutely incredible things. So I just think that for me it was easy. There were times where there weren't, enough cans of beans in the cupboard for sure, and it wasn't all, rosy. But I think it's a lot harder for young people these days for sure.
Because I know that a lot of young people who probably listen to this podcast, and a lot of those young people we're talking about now may have experienced that feeling that they have their path written for them, and suddenly it's something gets closed down. They may be in a relationship. They think they're going to spend the rest of their life with their school childhood sweethearts, and suddenly that gets closed down. So talking about rejection and adversity and the ability to make a change in the direction of path that they're going in lives, what would you advise to a young person?
I always worry about giving advice, mainly because I'm a white middle class male who is going to be all right if their wage packet doesn't necessarily come in this month, and I have a house, I have all of those things. And for a lot of people, the reality is that actually they're going to be in severe consequences very, very quickly. So I certainly wouldn't necessarily ask anybody to take advice from me. But what I would say, if I was able to pass some advice on and they were open to it, is that I think one of the hardest things to recognise in any human being, whether you're 10 or whether you're 20, is that we are very adaptable people, and that we manage to, you look at the current circumstance, we've adapted to this incredibly quickly, and we will do so going forward. But it's that ability to be able to process things. So for me, there are things that have happened in my life that I was lucky I had people to process those things with. And what I worry about, especially mental health services, is that we currently tell people, young people, that if something's wrong, you have a mental health issue or you have some form of mental illness, and so you have to go and see a psychiatrist in order to have that space. Now, for some people, that's absolutely appropriate. But actually what we need are communities, people, relationships, whether it be through education, whether it be through neighbours, whether it be through third sector, where actually we can push a lot of those conversations back into the community. Because not everybody that I see that does feel that disconnect or that adversity or traumatic experiences, not every single one of those people will have an acute mental health need. A lot of them, their experience, their distress makes complete sense in context of what they've experienced. Now, I do a lot of training with a wonderful man who actually they came in to see me when I was in services one day. They haven't saw me out, I was just the person that was there at the time. And they'd lost, and they always tell this story, they'd lost both their parents and their partner, and in the space of 3 or 4 weeks, had to then move 100 miles away, and I was about to get evicted from their flat because they'd lost their job. Now, there was nothing there that told me that there was anything wrong with them, that they were ill. It was the fact that their situation was so adverse and distressing. What they really needed was somebody to go, my God, that's absolutely awful. Let's try and get you some help with that. And, what can we do? Their symptoms weren't of illness, their symptoms were of distress. So I think what's really key for young people is to understand that although it will be no comfort, me saying, well, it's an entirely normal situation, that the comfort needs to be that, yes, it's an entirely normal response to the situation, but here's somebody to help you process. There isn't necessarily a psychiatrist, and we all need those spaces. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be through talking therapy. It can be through sport, it can be through art, it can be all of those different mediums. We don't always need to talk about it. sat down face to face opposite somebody, because it's quite an intense experience, isn't it, to go and have that form of therapy. I've been both sides of the table, so I get it. But I think we need to make sure that those spaces and those people and those conversations therapeutically are able to be accessed, because it doesn't mean you have to be a therapist to have a therapeutic conversation, does it? People have therapeutic conversations all the time. Whether it be through a neighbour. When I lived in Brimau, one of the very first memories I have is that the neighbours would literally open a window and have a chat with each other with a cup of tea. I used to walk down to school and see that all the time. So I think that pushing therapeutic conversations into the community with people like yourself, other people who have the skill set to do that, I just think it's common sense, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think it's sometimes we see this problem and we look so far and so deeply into finding the answers, when really the answers are probably right in front of us. And it's exactly the same way I talk about when it comes to happiness. I think so many of us are looking in so far in the future, and we're looking and we're searching for this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, when really what happens if that pot of gold was stood right next to us? We're just not seeing it. Because when I grew up as a young person, communities were everything. And if I wanted to socialise with my friends, then I'd have to leave the house, go knock on someone's door, speak to their parents, bring them out, and we'd then go to the park to socialise. Where a lot of young people now, if they want to speak to their friends, then they're either texting them or they're ringing them. They no longer have to leave the house to have that sense of community feeling. So from a parental side, and for parents maybe listening here to this podcast, a lot of the time, especially I see in my family, that young people are so digitally connected that sometimes they lack that community cohesion simply because their communities are on their phones.
Yeah.
So how would a parent maybe encourage the young person to go out and find those communities?
It's hard, isn't it? Because at the moment it's conflicting, because technology is how we're coping, isn't it? So it's definitely a very useful a wonderful tool. When you think about public health resources, for instance, and public health being things that are readily available to public of all ages, technology is a wonderful place for those things to happen. Through apps, and I know, for instance, the safety planning format, which is something I use in services all the time. Launching a website with that safety planning format on has been invaluable to so many people. But the problem is that it's not necessarily the fact that technology is there; it's how we use it. And I think the culture around it is very, very significant. It's interesting when you look at some of the studies, and I'm not one of those people that reads research loads, because I find it quite difficult, quite hard, and quite boring. And I never thought I would ever quote research. But what I've understood research to be is that it's just a bunch of stories that then make up a huge amount of data, which you can then go, oh, I thought that was a thing, but I didn't realise it was actually like a proper thing. But when you look at the research about countries that, for instance, just have better weather, they're more social, and it's not to say that, everybody should move out of Wales and Scotland and Ireland. But what it is to say is that all of those different societal factors and how we live our lives, the cultures within our communities, have a huge amount of impact on our social and psychological health. So when it comes to phones and parenting, it's very hard at the moment to obviously enforce any boundary whatsoever over technology. I totally get that. But I think what we need to understand is that those social norms of going around and knocking on your mates, and all of those benefits of being present with somebody. It's so anxiety driven when you're constantly in such a high state of alert. You pick up your phone, you've got all of those different apps and all of those different things on there, which are intensely useful. It's not necessarily saying that all of those things aren't useful, but it's to say that all of those things are not useful and beneficial to you long term, all at the same time. Actually being able to break our life down into smaller chunks and to not have to think such big thinking all the time and to be overloaded with all of those things is a prime condition that we all need. So the South Wales Valleys, for example, is a perfect example of how economic, socially, politically, all of those things come together. And if those things are not right, have a huge impact on the population and the people that live there and people's mental health levels. Unemployment, is massively linked to people's distress levels, lack of opportunity, all of those things. So when it comes down to technology, although there's many available opportunities there and we can use it in wonderful ways, Christmas time, hashtag join in with Sarah Milligan, where she does that. I think it's a brilliant use of social media to connect people. And I've seen on social media the last couple of weeks, I mean, I'll be honest, I live on Twitter. You would know that. I'm there all the time. But mainly it's because I get so many thoughts from there, so many things to reflect on. But what I do is I turn my phone off or put it on airplane mode, and then I have the time to be able to sit and process that stuff. And again, that ability to process once we've taken in all that information is really important. When I was growing up, if I had an argument in school, they'd have to know my landline number. They'd have to ring the landline number if they want to get a hold of me, go through my parents, and then have the guts to say something really horrible to me over the phone, whilst their parents were stood across from them on the landline, and my parents were there as well. I mean, there's just so many barriers. But now, with that instant nature, I think what doesn't help them is it doesn't help us understand impulse control very well. I always have a problem with, the fact that, we like to binge watch loads of stuff, which is great, but then we don't build any anticipation anymore. So actually waiting until next week is a really good skill to learn. The skill of being able to wait and contain and all of those different things is really important for self-regulation. So, I'm going to sound like a bore, but, those are the things that I think, culturally we've got wrong with technology, and there are countries that use it in a much better way that I think we could learn a lot of lessons from. Oh, last point. Sorry, that's what I meant to say at the start. When I spent a lot of time in Germany, right? And Berlin is like my favourite place in the world. Anybody that knows me will tell you I go on about it all the time. It doesn't matter. But what I love about it, nobody's in a rush. So when you go to the traffic lights, if you ever cross the road in Germany until that person is green on the traffic lights, people will tut at you, right? And they will not be impressed if you go when it's red, because people appreciate the art of stopping, having to wait, just taking your time, and nobody's in a rush. Yeah, you get back on the plane or the train or whatever, you get straight back into the UK, and it's like whoosh, straight off. So it's just culturally, physically, how it feels different in different places.
I think it's everything that I picked up, having done a lot of work up in London. It's just how fast-paced and fast-moving it is. For example, if you're walking down an embankment on the side of the Thames, if you stop and take a minute to take it all in, suddenly someone's in your back saying, come on, move out the way. And suddenly, it's nice to be involved with that fast-paced environment, but then it's like realizing and looking at the bigger picture and taking time to take things in is so invaluable. And I think that's a great point. And I really do believe a lot of young people aren't good with patience, as you say, because we've grown up in a world of instant gratification. And it's like what I see across on social media. Probably about a year ago now, was a big trend where if someone would upload a photo and it wouldn't get, say, 50 likes in 10 minutes, which was what they usually got, suddenly they delete it and it was, oh, sorry, Instagram deleted my photo. But Instagram never deleted the photo. They just didn't get that instant gratification of what they expected. So they say they failed. I'll take it down. I'll upload it another time when more people maybe is on the app and I may get that photo. And it's that anticipation that young people are scared to wait or have to work or to earn something. It's like, I think it's the reason why Netflix is probably growing, because it's a case of that I can sit down and binge watch a TV show in the space of a day and watch whole 8 episodes for some people, especially during this time, whereas maybe you watch something on your usual Sky, then it may take, you've got to watch 1 episode every week to find out. Yeah. But young people don't like waiting.
And it's also linked, I think, to finding meaning, isn't it? That, again, it's another place to try and find meaning in the world that social media can be brilliant at. I mean, I've met some of my best friends through social media, and I'm very fortunate that I've been able, I spend a lot of time, and I know this sounds completely bizarre, but I spend a lot of time constructing how I operated on social media. I don't really do a lot of Instagram or a lot of Facebook. I do a lot of Twitter because I follow people who fulfill needs in me. So, actually that make me think, that challenge me, that talk about things that are political. I love a stupid dog video more than anybody. So I've got all of those people. So actually my timeline, I quite love it, because I flick down and I see, there's so-and-so talking about their mum that isn't very well at the moment. Oh gosh, I hope they're all right. It's these things that are meaningful, but also you then, because you follow meaningful things, you then have meaningful interactions. And so I think social media, in that sense, if you spend real time carving out an area and a space, I think could be really beneficial. I'm doing a little bit of work in the front line at the moment in the NHS, obviously, with the way that things are at the moment. And the amount of people who just go out of their way to just say, I'm just dropping you a message. I've never met you before, but I just want to know that you're all right. And, the tweet that you sent last week really resonated, and I'm just very grateful for that. And I want you to know that, I'm thinking of you at the moment. And those little tiny things, those kind acts from strangers are what we would love to have in real life, wouldn't it? They make more meaning probably physically, but we can carve those spaces out for us, but only if we spend time thinking about what meaning we want to get out of the situation. You might want celebrity gossip and all that stuff, and that's great, we can have that. But let's think about some other interests that we have as well, and some other people that are going to bring a lot of different value into your life.
What's the one thing that you wish you knew 10 years ago, or when you very first started out in this line of work, that you know now?
Well, I was a bit weird, so I kind of already knew that judgment, empathy and kindness were, there was no place for judgment anywhere, regardless of what people have done. And there's always spaces for empathy and kindness and compassion, all those things. Those values were massively ingrained in me by my parents and grandparents. So I kind of had a little bit of a head start, because my grandparents were ridiculously moral and the most nice. They're just the nicest people in the world. But so I had a head start on that. So the typical lessons that I think most people would say would probably covered from a young age. The thing that I wish I knew, if I'm being honest, was that I wish I knew how wonderful the world was. And when I don't necessarily mean just people, I mean places and spaces. When I started to travel, and obviously, people need a certain amount of privilege to travel. I really appreciate that. But similarly, travel to places and have conversations with people. Because what you realise is that when you're able to do that, you understand just how interconnected everybody is and how you depend on people. I've got friends in Italy and lots of different places around Europe and in the US. And what I find amazing is that, we commonly, at the moment, we're commonly experiencing something. So, our worries here are pretty much the same as the people in another country and in the neighbouring country there. But I wish I'd have been able to really understand that a lot earlier on, because I think I probably might have spent a little bit more time travelling. And exploring the world. I mean, the stories that I'm able to look back on. One in particular that I always loved thinking about was when I was on a beach in Spain. I'd gone over there to do some work, but also to have a little bit of a break. And I was by myself. So I was on the beach one night, and it was at the time when I was smoking, so I was on a couple of cigarettes there and everything, just chilling, living the dream. And I'm not a massive drinker, so I just had a couple of drinks, and I was started by myself. And this man came over and just randomly started talking to me, and he was Austrian. We were having a conversation in very very broken English, and anyway we were talking for about 15 minutes, and he was telling me all about how difficult things were for him at that time, and all this different stuff. And then of course he picked up that obviously I worked in mental health services at the time, and we had a conversation. And at the end of the conversation, he had these beads around his neck, and they're just wooden beads. And he took them off, and he said I went through an even more difficult time a couple of years ago when somebody gave me these and said, actually there'll be a time where you believe in the world again. And I got these from somebody else who believed in the world again. And when the moment came, I passed them on to you, and he passed them on to me. He just said, you've allowed me that space to not feel all of those different things, and so here they are, and I still got them. And that was by a complete stranger, whose name I don't remember, in the middle of a beach, the most random place, that I would never have foreseen myself happening. But yet that experience has given me so much and taught me so much. That 1 minute of interaction from somebody that I'll never meet again keeps me going in really difficult moments. So I just wish I'd have known that it's not money that matters, it's not job prospects that matter, it's people and relationships and experiences. I wish I'd have spent a lot more money on experiences rather than trying to chase the latest aftershave and jeans and all of those different things.
That's amazing, and I'm just blown away by that story of kind of how one person who was a complete stranger who decided to start a conversation with just led to you being in such a special place and sharing that experience with them. And likewise, that has impacted you, it's impacted them, but also now the ability to be a great storyteller like you are right now is this ability of where now I'm just in this conversation hasn't just been between you two, it's between every time you've told the story as well that's made them feel something, and all of us are connected now emotionally through this amazing story. And I think that's a fantastic note to kind of bring our main conversation to a close, because it's just it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside, and it's something that sometimes that we often shy away from doing. I know a lot of time my mates will always say, for example, whenever you get in a taxi, I'm always the one person I'll talk the taxi driver's head off, because I just want to have a conversation and get to know somebody.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And also, I think, just to finish, that story is not unique, and it's not me. I don't want people to think, well, he's lucky because he travelled to so and so. You don't have to travel to experience that. I'm not saying that. I hear these stories all the time. Complete strangers, especially in mental health, complete strangers who have said something, asked something. I met somebody once that had offered a sweet to somebody that was, 60 years older than this young person, that had saved their life, or because they stopped, had a second, offered them a sweet. Those things, those strangers at those moments in times, those passing moments are absolutely crucial to our mental health, and they save a lot more lives than we can possibly ever measure. We will never have that data. That will never be reported because we can't measure it. But know that from somebody who sees this happening every week, there are a lot more people who reach out and who support people. And we will never know those stats, but it's important that people know that there are a huge amount of kind people out there.
Do you find that people who are kind themselves seem to find kindness in others easier?
Yeah, I think I do. But I also similarly, going back to what we were talking about, seeing beyond the person we've got in front of us, I think everybody has the capacity for kindness. I just think that, particularly for some males, sometimes it could be seen as quite a difficult emotion to grapple with. And I know some male friends of mine are the kindest people that I know. It's not that it's attributed to gender, but I just think there are certain things that we frown on from people being openly kind and compassionate, because actually what we'll get is somebody going, oh, isn't that nice? And that's really kind, and oh, that's really sweet, and really, all those things. But as if we say something judgmental, or we make a sarky comment, then we get a laugh, which is a different kind of gratification, isn't it? And I'm not saying that that's not important, but I do think the kind people, I always try as far as I can possibly go to try and make sure that, I listen to everybody, and I try and make people feel, that I'm listening and that they matter. And I generally find, if I'm being honest, not because I necessarily put it out there, but that I get a lot of it back. My uni students are amazing, absolutely amazing. I miss them terribly at the moment. But the amount of times where, they bailed me out. I've had a lift from the train station before, my car's broken down, my car broke down again. I don't want to say my car broke down too much, I'm having to touch wood. But it broke down once on the M4, and one of them was driving past and picked me up. There's all of those different things. So I think that, when we're open to kindness, I think a lot of it does come.
Amazing. And before we finish up here, I want to finish off, and I finish up all my podcast episodes with something called my final 5, which is 5 quick fire rapid questions. And if you can
save the most stressful part to the end.
And if you could just answer these questions with just one sentence, short and sweet. But I think it's great to summarize kind of where your thoughts are and the kind of person you are, and it leaves us with that last bit of inspiration before we bring this episode to a close. So the first one is an easy one, and that is, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for health right now at the moment.
Amazing. And question number 2 is, what is the greatest piece of advice that you've ever received?
Do I have to do one sentence?
It can be longer than one sentence for this one. Yeah.
I was going to say it might have to be. The greatest piece of advice I have received, and it sticks with me, is somebody once telling me that it's very important that you look through 2 lenses through life. So one of the lenses is empathy and compassion and kindness, and that you have to be able to see people's pain, and that you have to understand it, and you have to respond to it. But you have to be careful, because if you only put that lens in, you'll see pain everywhere. And the other lens is the lens of hope. So, if you make sure that you regularly put that in, you'll see hopes everywhere. It's in, people smiling at each other, people being kind to each other, laughing, smiling, and really meaningful stuff. So the key is, and this advice was given to me, you need to make sure that you remember to put both those lenses in, because they're as important as each other.
And question number 3, what is the most important lesson that you have learned when it comes to mental health?
that often you can see the logic in what people have done and what people say and what people think. Often it's entirely logical.
And explain a little bit more about that answer.
Often, the need to get away from a situation, the need to, the need to reflect, or the need to sort of associate yourself with the problem and blame yourself, or feel abandoned or grief or lost and all of those different things, I often think make sense. And sometimes the things that people say don't make them crazy in my book. Actually, I think they make them often very human.
And as a build on from that question number 4 is, what is the one thing that you wish everyone else knew?
That I'm wearing odd socks right now. That's a bit of a cop-out. The thing I wish everybody else knew was just how that there is an expiry date on blaming your parents for your problems. I could blame my parents for a lot of things. They gave me a lot of gifts, but there's undoubtedly the clashes and goodness as well. And there are things that sadly parents don't get right, but there comes a moment where letting that go and being able to carve your own path is very important.
Amazing. And before I ask you question number 5, I'd just like to take a moment out just to reflect on the incredible conversation that we've just had, but most importantly to acknowledge you for the amazing work that you're doing. I followed you now on social media for some time, and you're always one of the people who I look for inspiration for, but also to see the amazing work and the impact that you're already making, not just for young people, but also the teachers, the educators, the people from sport and all different industries who you're having a real difference upon. And I just would like personally to thank you for the incredible work that you are doing, because it means a huge amount to me, but I know it also means a huge amount to the people who follow you and the people who have worked with and closely with over recent years. So on behalf of myself and everyone else who's had the pleasure to come in contact with you or heard of, or even spoke to, or just seen the things you're up to, I'd personally like to say a massive thank you.
Look, I learned long ago that it's very important to take compliments, because they are meant with compassion and very, very heartfelt feelings. So I will thank you for that, and not hide beneath my blazer, which is what I normally want to do when people say nice things to me. So I do thank you for that, and I also think that the people like yourself who are working with young people in different spaces, and not the standard spaces sometimes, they're carving out their own space for those people, I think is massively important. So, don't underestimate the conversations that you have and the things that you do that make people feel the way that they do. And then those ripples happen, don't they? It's all about that, rippling on someone else. So keep rippling, buddy.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Mike. It really does mean the absolute world to me. And if people listening to this podcast want to find out more about you, where can they find your work?
Probably Twitter, I'd imagine. I mean, that's technically the place. I'm a bit weird. I don't really like going on like websites and stuff like that. Honestly, when if you put show notes up and stuff like that, I go, oh no. And then I realised that Twitter's actually a public forum as well. Who'd have thought it? Sometimes I say things. I put photos of my dog, and then I get into a room and people are like, "Oh, how's your dog?" I'm like, "Actually, no, God." So yeah, Twitter is probably the place to find me.
Twitter, and what's your Twitter handle?
It's at Mike Armiger.
And last and final question, and this is the question that I always finish with at the end of every episode, and that is, what does believing in yourself mean to you?
Oh, that's a really hard question to finish with. Believing in yourself means that it's reminding yourself of all the parts that sometimes you forget, and they don't necessarily go away. Even in difficult times, I found that there have been times where I've really had to struggle, and where things have been difficult. And because I'm quite comfortable in some aspects now, sometimes I think I forget those parts. And so reminding yourself of history and where you've been and where you can possibly go despite all of those things, I think is probably the definition of believing in yourself, isn't it?